Good evening, and welcome to this evening of celebration in words and song on the eve of the papal visit to Scotland. In coming here, the Pope will be, for the first time, setting foot in a country in which the Protestant tradition holds sway, in a remarkably unbroken line back to Knox, Calvin and Luther. But it's also a country in which there is a large and loyal Roman Catholic minority, and the two communities haven't always got on well together, which is no doubt why so many high hopes and so many deep-seated fears surround this occasion. But tonight we hope to set prejudice and misunderstanding aside as a number of church men and women from differing denominations express and reaffirm the basic Christian values which they share, rather than the points upon which they disagree. And to that purpose we've come here to the Jesuit Church of St. Aloysius in Garnethill, Glasgow, which was built in 1908, although architecturally it harks back to the classical Renaissance period of the 17th century. It's a very Scottish church. One of the side chapels is dedicated to St. John Ogilvie, the Glasgow Catholic martyr. And there are 4 small mosaics in the nave which depict the 4 saints most closely associated with Scotland: St. Mungo, St. Ninian, St. Margaret and St. Columba. And it's in this setting that our guests will first say a few words and then invite our choirs to sing an appropriate hymn.
6 months ago, we launched a programme of spiritual preparation for the Pope's visit with the slogan, "Yes to God, yes to each other, yes to life." The participation of the moderator and of so many other church leaders in this hymn programme is an illustration of yes to each other put into practice here today. I am happy to be sharing this occasion with them, and I thank them warmly for their presence. Yes to God necessarily precedes yes to each other. A full commitment to yes to God means that our religious motivation is no longer fear of God, and that we have passed beyond the stage of regarding religion in terms of obligations to be fulfilled and of sins to be avoided. For it means a totally positive Christianity, in which our one overriding motive is love, a love that is a selfless self-sacrifice for God and for our fellow men and women. Yes to God also means yes to Jesus who is God become man, in order to show us what God is like, so that we in turn may grow in our likeness to him. Love one another as I have loved you, Jesus appeals to us. I think that we have a Pope who attracts because he shows something of that love in his words and in his actions. It is my prayer that his visit may inspire us to a greater implementation of that love in our Christian faith and our religious practice, and so bring us closer to God and closer to each other. And that leads me to my choice of hymn and appeal for the coming down of that love to us. Come down, O love divine.
As soon as we of the Scottish Congregational Churches heard that the Pope was coming to Scotland, we decided to extend to him the hand of friendship and welcome, especially as he's coming primarily on a pastoral visit to his own people. I've been very glad to get all the preliminary papers and notice the strong emphasis there on a recall to the central things of the faith. Now, to those of us who are interested in the Church's praise, it's rather fascinating to discover that just as we are learning to sing some of the modern contemporary Catholic hymns, written, for example, by my friend James Quinn, so our Catholic friends are singing as never before the great classic hymns of Watts and Wesley. It's one of them I've chosen, a hymn that comes out of our own tradition, Jesus Shall Reign, written by Isaac Watts when he was a young man of 20, challenged by his father to write something better than the Psalms, which were sung exclusively then in congregational praise. And so he paraphrased a great Jewish hymn of the coronation of an earthly king, to be the vehicle of Christian praise for Jesus, the universal King. He wrote this hymn when he was 20, 70 years before the birth of the modern missionary movement. And so it was prophetic of the church's outreach. And it's still contemporary, for it tells us of the church's unfinished task. We all share in the travail that is to make Christ's kingdom come. I'm glad to have a part on this occasion. There are other times when we can explore together in charity and candor with our Roman friends the things that still divide us. But surely it's right now to have the emphasis on the things to which we all say Amen, especially Christ's universal prayer, that his kingdom may come and the Father's will be done. So I've chosen the earliest and perhaps still the best of all missionary hymns, speaking of Christ, the universal King, worthy of the praise of all men.
I see that the theme for Pope John Paul's visit to Scotland is saying yes to God, yes to each other, and yes to life. I think that becomes meaningful and personal when each one of us says yes to Jesus Christ. I have the feeling, if asked, Pope John Paul would say the same. And you know, with Salvationists throughout Scotland, I pray that his visit will be an exhilarating time of spiritual renewal for his people. As I've watched the TV coverage of his amazing international tours and his warm and inspiring contacts with people of many races and nations, I've noticed how he gives emphasis to the lordship of Jesus Christ and the necessity to obey Christ's words. He once said, "Open wide the doors to Christ without fear." That's why I've chosen the hymn, "Crown Him with Many Crowns." It's a kind of coronation psalm, acknowledging Jesus Christ as Lord of life and Lord of love. Whatever differences there may exist among the many denominations of the Christian Church, we do have one thing in common: the lordship of Jesus Christ and his preeminence as Saviour and Redeemer. I pray that as Pope John Paul focuses the hearts and minds of his people on our living Lord, that their love for Christ will be rekindled and their faith in him will be renewed. Love and faith. Actually, Pope John Paul's name reminds us of John, the apostle of love, and Paul, the apostle of faith, and I'm sure his messages will emphasize love for Christ and faith in him.
Every Methodist preacher is required at a very early stage in his career to read the standard sermons of John Wesley. Among these is one bearing the title, The Catholic Spirit. It is worthwhile in introducing the next hymn for me to quote some words from that sermon, which have a very direct bearing on the whole thrust and direction of the ecumenical effort of our day. The words are these: "A man of Catholic spirit is one who gives his hand to all whose hearts are right with his heart, one who loves as friends and brethren in the Lord, as members of Christ and children of God and fellow heirs of his kingdom, all of whatever opinion or worship or congregation, who love God and man, who rejoice to please, and fearing to offend God are careful to abstain from evil, and zealous of good works. He is the man of truly Catholic spirit, who bears all these continually upon his heart. He assists them to the uttermost of his power in all things spiritual and temporal. He is ready to spend and to be spent for them." The fourth and fifth verses of the hymn, which I have chosen, put all of that with perfect simplicity. To my friends in the Church of Scotland, whose assembly I recently attended, I offer it in gratitude. And to the Pope, as he comes to visit this part of his world parish, I offer it in welcome on behalf of the Methodist people.
Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown, we're told, and although popes no longer wear the triple tiara, it must still be very lonely at the top. And I often wonder what it must feel like to Karol Wojtyla to be Pope John Paul II. He is a man sustained by the grace of God in his high office, but still, as a human being, vulnerable. Has he got intimates in whom he can confide with confidence and nourishingly? I hope so. I'm not a Roman Catholic, and many of my religious convictions are not shared with those of Pope John Paul II. Yet, as a human being and as a bishop in the Church of God, my heart goes out to him in his high office, and that is why I have chosen Charles Wesley's hymn, "Forth in thy name, O Lord, I go. Forth in thy name, O Lord, I go, my daily labour to pursue. Thee only thee resolve to know, in all I think or speak or do." And then that verse which unaccountably is omitted from so many hymn books, but which speaks so powerfully to me. Preserve me from my calling's snare, and hide my simple heart above the thorns of choking care, the gilded baits of worldly love. And what finer consecration of a minister of the gospel could there be than in the last verse? For thee delightfully employ whate'er thy bounteous grace hath given, and run my course with even joy, and closely walk with thee to heaven.
My first word must be one of sincere welcome to the Pope when he comes as head of the Church of Rome to visit his own people who are our compatriots. Our prayer must surely be that his presence here bring blessing and spiritual renewal to all his people who have prepared so prayerfully for his coming. It is our hope that the spirit of this occasion can be carried forward in dialogue in the months and years ahead. The Pope himself has declared an ecumenical intent that the Church dare not fail to seek the unity of all Christians everywhere. In this context, on the basis of agreed doctrinal conviction, we look forward to the same charitable and understanding exploration of our continuing areas of disagreement. The Pope, too, has declared himself to be a man of peace, one who is committed to working for peace. In Scotland, the peace movement is already gaining great acceleration, and it will not be too much to expect that he will have something of great significance to say to us in this vital area of concern. Because he is so transparently a good man devoted to the Christian gospel, his presence in Scotland will itself be an evangelical challenge to those who have come to oppose the Christian faith or who have indeed lapsed from it. So then, my choice of him, the Saviour died but rose again, is an affirmation of the great central fact of the Christian faith, the resurrection of Christ, which we all share. It is sung appropriately to the tune St. Andrew.
Despite all we've heard here tonight, no one, I imagine, assumes that the papal visit will automatically mean a coming together of the different denominations. After all, only recently at the General Assembly, we saw that not all Church of Scotland ministers necessarily agreed with each other about everything, and we should be the poorer if they did. But we do hope that this will be an occasion of reconciliation and spiritual renewal, a reminder of the ties which bind rather than the pressures which pull apart. And that's the theme of our last hymn. From St. Aloysius Church in Glasgow, goodbye.